Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second video broadcast under the Solutions at 70 headline. Israel is preparing to enter its 8th decade next year in 2018, and many people are focused on the problems and the obstacles and the challenges ahead. We've decided to launch a new series called Solutions at 70, Innovative Approaches Towards Two States. The goal of the series is to discuss and to highlight the challenges that are facing Israelis and Palestinians looking ahead, with a real focus on experts and innovators and activists who are working towards real and tangible solutions that will help to overcome the challenges and to build a better and a more secure future. This week, we're turning our attention to what is perhaps the most challenging and dangerous situation of all, which is the crisis in Gaza. In recent weeks, there have been a lot of events, electricity cuts that have worsened the humanitarian crisis, pressure on Qatar from the Gulf states, the discovery of new Hamas tunnels dug since the last war, all of which are raising tension and elevating the threat of another war in the near future. The near total shutdown of Gaza's only power plant last week it shockingly plunged most of the strip into near total darkness. At the same time, we've seen a flurry of diplomatic activity, and we've seen new attention directed to proposals aimed at alleviating the burdens on Gaza and potentially transforming life for its people. So we're glad today to be joined by a series of experts who are going to share both their take on the current situation as well as some exciting visions for solutions. Omar Shaban is a commentator and expert on the political and humanitarian situation in Gaza and was a candidate for the Palestinian parliamentary elections in 1996. We're joined by Christopher Choa and Luke Self of AECOM Design and Planning, and Sebastian Belasheko of the Global Steering Group for Social Impact Investment, who have been working together with Palestinian business and civil society leaders to develop an incredible and detailed plan for transforming Gaza's infrastructure, opening up its economy, and integrating it into a better Palestinian future. During the call today, Omar will help us to better understand the crisis, the factors behind it, and the short-term political maneuvers and actions that could help to alleviate it. Chris and Luke will walk us through their incredibly detailed and thorough vision for total modernization and transformation of Gaza, including plans for an airport, seaport, new electric and water facilities, a rail link, and many other updates to the Strip's urban areas. It's a bold plan filled with proactive solutions that totally reimagines and expands our concept of what the future could look like for Gaza and a Palestinian state. So we'll begin now with presentations from our speakers, and we'll reserve the last 20 to 25 minutes for questions from our audience. If you do have questions that you would like to ask, please email info@jstreet.org. So Omar, all of us have been reading in the last few weeks about the crisis in Gaza, which of course has been worsening for many years now. It can be hard for us not living there to grasp the full scope of the humanitarian crisis and the impact that it has on the day-to-day life of Gazans. I think we would all really appreciate it if we could open up this call with your personal description of how the various shortages of water and electricity and the other economic problems, how they impact the day-to-day life of the residents of the Gaza Strip. So Omar, take it away.
First of all, thank you very much. Good evening to everybody. Thank you very much for having me as a guest on this presentation talking about Gaza. Yes, I'll make myself very short. We can say we have been saying in the past 10 years that Gaza is about to collapse. But this time it's the real collapse. It's real in the crossroads. The BA has taken some measures against Gaza in the past couple of months to squeeze Hamas. They deduct the salary of the BA employee in Gaza by 30%. For the electricity bill to the Israeli company by 30%, and they stopped to provide Gaza with the fuel to that operates the power plant in Gaza. The most significant problem now is the electricity shortage. We have 2 to 3 hours a day for the past couple of months. The weather in Gaza is extremely hot. It's 40 degree, which is unprecedented. It impacts everything. The sewage. Now Gaza pump around 50,000 cubic meter every day to the sea, which reach to the shore of Israel. The hospital in Gaza are in deep troubles. Many children have passed away because they could not be transferred to the Israel or to the West Bank medical referral. Gaza people found themselves in the middle again between the fight, the contradicting policies of Israel, the BA, and Hamas. Recently, Hamas has started relation with Egypt, which was surprising to everybody. The leadership of Hamas has visited Egypt, and it seems that there is some sort of normalization between Egypt and Hamas. The other problem that the crisis in the Gulf, which make it difficult for Qatar to continue its support to Gaza and to do some construction project, despite the fact that the Qatari ambassador to Gaza was in Gaza last week, but I think it was for symbolic reason. Qatar is not anymore in support or is able to support Gaza as it used to be. My final statement is that Gaza is very scared of a new escalation. There is different exchange of statement between Israel and Hamas and other political faction that a new escalation might happen anytime soon. And of course, it will be extremely, extremely difficult than before. Gaza has been subjected to 3 wars in the past 6 years, in 2008, 2012, 2014, and still 50% of those destroyed, around 7,000 houses, have not been built yet. So we talk about 50% of the houses that were destroyed in 2014 war are not built yet. The donors or the commitment of the donors in the Cairo conference, which was held in Cairo 12 of October 2014, have not been dispersed. Around according to the World Bank, is only around the 35% of the pledges in Cairo have been dispersed. It's extremely difficult, and people are very depressed, very worried. There are different sorts of threats, either by internal clashes. People are very angry, or clashes between Hamas and Israel. I read today that President Abbas is going to take more tough measures against Gaza. He will send around 8,000 employees of the education and health sector to sit at home. Those employees who are working under Hamas government for the past 10 years but have been paid by the BA government. President Abbas will ask these people to sit at home. This will make extremely, extremely unbelievable situation in Gaza, because these are the big two main sectors, education and health. And already the situation of health and education in Gaza is extremely bad. International community need to intervene. Last week, I was invited to meet with Jason Greenblatt in a very confidential meeting, and we brought, myself and some other colleague, we brought the Gaza dimension into his eye, and we asked the American administration to intervene immediately and quickly to find a way on the Gaza situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Omar. And we'll certainly be coming back to you in the question and answer to dig in a little bit more to the reasons and the projections of what can happen. But what I'd like to do right now is turn to, I don't know if it's Luke or Chris or Sebastian, of which of the three of you will open it up. But between the three of you, you've been involved in developing an incredibly thorough and ambitious plan called Global Palestine Connected Gaza that aims to resolve these crises and provide a more sustainable future for Gaza with projects like a seaport and an airport and a rail link. Could you walk us through the basic elements of your plan and give us a sense of what the vision holds?
Thanks, Jeremy, and thank you, Omar, also for the vivid and brief synopsis of the Gaza situation. I am here as a representative of the team that produced the work out of AECOM. I want to very briefly introduce some of my co-leaders. Luke Self is based in our London office and project managed our entire team, and he'll be speaking a little bit about the integration piece. And I also wanted to introduce Sebastian Wilisieko, who's an extremely talented economist with a great deal of background experience in Palestine, West Bank, who traveled with me right from the very, very beginning when we started our forays into Gaza to start thinking about an overall plan. So all three of us will speak. I'll lead a little bit, and then hopefully we can get some input from the others. Can we have the first slide up? Do we see the slide up on the screen?
Yep. Okay, so this, hello, my name's Luke Self. The first slide, I guess, introduces us to the team and also a bit about the process. So Chris mentioned that his focus of this was to integrate a whole range of previous work, because before we were involved in the project, there had been years of good work that has been done. So we wanted to build on that work. And also, it was quite a challenge
to interrupt for 1 second. I ask you to speak much closer to the mic so that everybody can hear you clearly. And I'll also add for our viewers that if you click on the box at the bottom of your screen with the slide, you'll be able to see it more as the bigger central image on your screen. So just two quick updates for folks.
Thank you, Jeremy. Apologies. So as I was saying, it was quite a challenge for us as a technical team to reconcile all of the good work that has been done in previous years for Gaza over many years, and also integrate the inputs from a number of stakeholders, from international aid to Palestinian experts, and also Israeli security experts. So our team was, sorry, if you could just go forward to the next slide. So we had a relatively small team based in London, but traveling frequently to the region. 15 of us from a range of technical backgrounds. So we had economics, urban planning and public realm, transportation, utility infrastructure and environment experts. And we went to the region approximately 8 times. So we went to the West Bank and also to Gaza to meet various stakeholders, over 300 stakeholders across 50 consultative meetings, in fact. We produced a 400-page baseline report, which brought together all of the previous studies, a lot of field work, and our own synthesis. And we proposed through the process over 70 projects.
Luke,
yeah, Luke,
just move the screen to face you directly so we can hear you as clearly as possible. Sorry, Sebastian.
Don't worry, yeah.
We'll turn it towards you, but just needs to be right directly facing it.
Okay. Okay. My apologies. This worked in the test better.
That works.
So a series of trips to the region, many consultative meetings with over 300 stakeholders, and the proud outcome was to propose over 70 projects that the Palestinian private sector and others could potentially take on and potentially deliver that could contribute to realizing the vision. The plan was, our commission was led by the private sector, which is, I guess, the first time that this kind of work has been led by the private sector. So moving on to the next slide. So next slide, please.
Okay, so as Luke said, this is a private sector-led initiative. There have been plans for work in Gaza. There has been a few visionary works related to Gaza before, but this is really the very first time there has been a private sector-led vision that is also combined with physical planning and catalytic projects. So visions and projects, really, really very first time. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the assumptions that are operating in the background. The first and foremost, even though this is probably not the topic of the headlines today, we see from the very, very beginning that this work is part of a broader national Israeli-Palestinian effort that ultimately looks to reconcile and integrate Gaza with the West Bank. Next slide, please. And what we're really doing is thinking not just of all the problems and constraints of the area, but also the opportunities. And this is something that we think about a lot when we design cities, we do economic development internationally. We work very, very hard to convince stakeholders, governments, sovereign wealth funds, developers, that high population density is something that is desirable because it creates richness in social fabric and also makes infrastructure more affordable. We talk a lot about making compact linear boundaries around developments. Sometimes an economic imbalance creates an opportunity because it creates price advantages for workforce. Well, young people are really the key to all sorts of development. And when you have a degraded infrastructure, it's the opportunity to leapfrog over existing technologies and move forward. So all of these issues are currently constraints in Gaza. So these can all be turned into opportunities. And Gaza in particular is basically well situated with all of these constraints and with all of these opportunities as well. Next slide. So this is really what we're thinking about. On one hand is trying to not focus just on the constraints, but thinking about how every single one of these constraints are potentially opportunities for development, not just for resource development and demographic growth and richness, but the historical positioning and even the natural environment that parts of Gaza have on the edge of the Mediterranean. Next. So we're really focusing on 3 time frames. The current situation, and Omar said it very, very vividly and eloquently, it's urgent and it's focused around energy and water needs in particular. There are all sorts of issues that are mostly political issues, which we did not get into. This is not the topic of our conversation or our exploration. And these are all issues that will progressively have to be realized. But what we've done is we've leapt ahead and we've thought forward all the way to 2050. And we asked ourselves, if this region ultimately develops along rational model, if this region behaves like every other region ultimately behaves in the world, what would it look like? And then stepping backwards towards the current day, what do we need to do a year before 2050, a decade before 2050, 10 years, 20 years before 2050, and then we will have a better idea about what we need to prioritize in the midterm and in the short term. So it's a way of thinking about planning not by the next day, but going all the way in the future and working backwards. And that is really the whole thesis behind Connected Gaza and Global Palestine. Next slide. So let's just think about what the 21st century is really like. Next slide. And if you think about what's really going on in this century, not just in the Middle East or Gaza or Palestine, but globally, it's the rise of what we call the megacity, the megacity region. And all areas in the world are starting to behave this way. It's no longer about one city in a cluster of other cities, but these cities that are networking formally or informally and creating a single economic unit, which is often very, very vast and with a large incorporated population. The Pearl River Delta right now, for example, is not just Hong Kong or Macau or Shenzhen or Guangzhou or Zhuhai. It's a connected population of around 80 million people, 80. That is currently straddling 3 controlling political boundaries. You look on, the Netherlands as an example. You have Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Utrecht, The Hague, which have been in the past competing cities, which are now coming together into something they call the Randstad or the metropole, because they recognize they are not big enough to survive economically in global terms. And we we believe that this is actually what pretty much everywhere else in the world is doing, even in the United States, even in Europe. And we don't think that the Middle East, however complicated the situation is now, will ultimately behave very differently. Next slide. So when we think about Gaza, we're not thinking about Gaza by itself, regardless of what the political discussions are like. We're thinking about Gaza as a neighborhood within a evolving mega city region that may stretch from Amman to Tel Aviv and north from Haifa all the way down to El Arish in Egypt. And this is one single economic unit that functions economically and physically and potentially even demographically as a single city. And the key here is time. Over time, is this connected population joined up within a 1-hour transit? And we believe within the 21st century, that's what other regions are doing. And ultimately, that's what this region will do, if only to maximize the individual economic and social and environmental benefits for each of the nodes. Next slide. So we really looked at these 4 phases that you can see here: recovering, connecting, growing, and consolidating. You can see on the right on the slide the basic major projects and initiatives that are happening in each of the phases, and very, very roughly what the time phases are like. But in the end, our vision here is not to make Gaza stand alone, and it's not just to make the West Bank integrated with Gaza, but we're trying to find a way for all of the nodes, all of the areas, all of the urban populations in this whole region to benefit from the development of their neighboring nodes. That's really what this is all about. Next slide. And so we're not going to go into detail about this, but you can see what are the stats for that went into the economic model that Sebastian prepared: recovering, connecting, growing, and consolidating. You can see that the ultimate population that we believe would be there in 2050 was about 3.5 million, which included emigration and immigration into the region at different stages. You can see the focus on in terms of economic development from the early stages, just getting the energy and water situation sorted out, and then eventually through reconstruction and on to advanced industries. And under each of these subheadings of economy, connectivity, and infrastructure, some of the initiatives and the strategies that would be existing within that time frame. So all of these kind of work together. This is a snapshot of Gaza itself. But remember, in the background of everything, we have the whole region, which is connecting and growing and consolidating. So this also affects Israel, it affects Jordan, it affects Egypt. Next slide. And through each of these 4 periods, recovering, connecting, growing, and consolidating, there are spatial implications. We have started with a view of what this area wants to look like on its own in 2050, and then we work backwards to 2030, 2025, and 2020 to rationalize the eventual development of projects, to focus and concentrate where short-term aid may be applied to maximum benefit, and also so that any development that happens in the short and medium term doesn't get in the way of the rational, most productive development in the long term. If we can manage to get a desal plant or a new power plant, let's not put it right in the middle of where we want the transport corridor to be, where we want the employment area to be. So this is very, very much part of our joined up integrated thinking that Luke was talking about. Next slide. And you can see here some of the vision principles that we used. So focusing around the existing population, consolidating the population growth in the north where most of the people are already, and putting our major connectivity gateways of port and airport where the people are already, and which is the area that is closest to the West Bank already. Another very important idea is to serve from the east. That's where the major transport corridors should be rationally. If you have to put in a heavy rail corridor or a heavy road corridor that will connect more broadly with the region, that's where it'll be. And that way we put the heavy infrastructure out of the way of the population, which is very, very different than, say, the 1970s, where you ran your expressways right through the middle of the city. We're anticipating the benefits of hindsight that we've learned all across the world in other cities. We use the local road networks and the local transport networks to bring people together and to bind them more closely with their own cities and their own history. And ultimately, we create a plan that allows the natural systems, in particular the aquifer and the water systems, to recover. Next slide. And then we go through all the different layers of planning. We sort out the interfaces, the potential conflicts, the adjacencies, so that each development, each catalytic project can potentially stand on its own, but also contribute to the whole. Next slide. And that creates this spatial vision for connected Gaza. It's not just a beautiful plan with nice colors. It's something that's built up very incrementally, looking in the future, working backwards, organizing adjacencies and infrastructure so all the pieces connect to each other, so that we have a vision and projects together that build up the overall picture. This creates the greatest benefits potentially for the people in Gaza that Omar spoke about, but also coordinates with a vision for a growing region that is consolidating into a single economic unit that becomes globally connected and globally competitive and stands with other emerging mega city regions all around the world, from Asia to America. Next slide. And just a quick snapshot. These are some of the detailed initiatives in the recovering phase through 2020. Next slide. In the connecting phase through 2025, this is really where we start to implement the build out for the port, the relocated airport in the north. We start to leverage the Gaza Marine, and we also start to create new employment districts in the north. Next slide. By 2030, the population is now coming back into Gaza after they've been potentially moving out. And we start to develop concentrations of populations and building out rationally around areas that already exist, developing the road and rail corridor in particular, and really emphasizing Gaza as a strategic gateway hub for the region, for Palestine, both by sea, by air, by rail, as well as by rail and by road. Next slide. And then finally, by 2050, this is the vision. This is where we started from, not where we're ending. And we work backwards from this point, but this is also what we think is totally rational. This is totally achievable by all sorts of places all around the world. And you see this happening in a very planned and in a very organic way, whether you're in the Middle East, whether you're in India, whether you're in China. All the places in the world that are basically focused on development are sort of moving in this general direction. And we don't see why Gaza, setting aside the political issues that are very, very much on the front burner right now, why this region will not act rationally over the longest period of time. Next slide. So imagining Gaza moving forward. Next slide. We looked at sort of four I guess, postcard ideas about Gaza: the gateway, the core, the wadi, and the beach. And we'll go through these one by one very quickly. Next slide. Right now, if you go to the next slide, in gateway, this is really the experience coming in from Eretz. And we think in the future, this is really the big connected gateway for the region, for Gaza in particular, a quadrimodal area that would bring the port, the airport, rail and road in very, very close proximity to each other. It's very close to the link to the West Bank, and more importantly, it's close to where the people already are. So this is a functional potentially working population catalyzed by connectivity. Next slide. So here we see kind of an overview of the whole region. You can see our proposal for the port and the airport in the foreground, and the urban development of the gateway behind it. Next slide. Just a quick snapshot about what some of these things might look like. These are very, they look beautiful, they're nicely colored, but they're just basically diagrams and sort of taking into account very, very roughly the space requirements for all of these different functions. Next slide. In core Gaza, this is very, very much where a lot of the existing population density is now. You can see in the inset panorama picture that there's quite a bit of urban density there. And by the way, we're urban planners. When we see something like this, we think it's beautiful. We see the potential in here. We see people living closely together around streets that are very well formed. We see the opportunity to create infrastructure where the per capita cost is relatively low because people are already living close together. Next slide. So in this core region, we are emphasizing the transportation network, employment, industrial areas to the east, leveraging on areas that already exist. We allow room for urban expansion of Gaza City towards the east, and we regenerate some of the older parts of Gaza City. Next slide. And, you know, we think this is the potential for the core of Gaza. There's a fishing port. The fishing port can remain a fishing port. It can turn into a more leisure port. We can create urban development around a waterfront. If you imagine this view, this is a physical view that's drawn from the existing one. Would this be a place that you would want to visit? If you were living in the region, would you come here during the summer for a few weeks? Can we think of this area as a very positive place, not just a negative one? We believe we can. The streets in the core of Gaza City are relatively narrow, which is a good thing. It doesn't have the crazy over provision that you have in places like Dubai. It makes it very easy to walk around. If you have a tram system or a connected and autonomous vehicle system, is this an attractive pedestrian environment for mixed-use development? We believe it is. We believe people will want to come here the way they might want to visit Beirut, the way they may want to visit Amsterdam or Istanbul or any other place that has this kind of urban environment. Next slide. And again, this is just a very quick overview of some of the spatial qualities of core Gaza. Next slide. Wadi Gaza. Right now, it is a place of great deal of contamination. A lot of solid waste and organic waste is dumped into the wadi. As Omar pointed out, there are thousands of cubic meters of sewage that flow from the wadi out into the Mediterranean into the freshwater intakes in Israel. This is not just a Palestinian problem. It's not just a Gazan problem, and it's an Israeli problem. So many groups have a vested interest in improving this area. So what could Wadi Gaza become? Next slide. Give me next slide, please. So just focusing on the Wadi development, you can see the waterway running through, and instead of just being a no-go zone where raw sewage is just dumping into a water which is just sitting there, can this area be cleaned up? Next slide. Can you leverage the existing wastewater treatment plants that are already almost there? Can you start to create all sorts of interesting habitat regeneration, active recreation, and make this a place where people will actually work very hard to live next to? This might be a very desirable place for universities, for example, or community centers. Next slide. So we think Wadi Gaza can turn from a open sewage alignment into a very interesting mixed-use, environmentally oriented community, a great location for a university, for example. Next slide. Next slide. And then finally, we reached the beach of Gaza. And just remember that Gaza is only several dozen kilometers down the Mediterranean coast from Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is an extraordinary environment, a wonderful Mediterranean waterfront. Gaza is exactly the same microclimate, exactly the same waters, exactly the same beaches. Would you not want to come here? If you live in the region, if you're an Arab from some other hinterland, would you not come here for 2 weeks with your family? We believe you would. We believe tourism is also an important driver for the economy, not just industry, not just education. So this is all very, very important as part of the story for Connected Gaza. Next slide. And then just focusing on that area, the rehabilitation areas, the expansion of the local town, very different scale from the north, which is much bigger, much denser, much more industrial, much more heavily reliant on infrastructure. Next. And we think this would be a very interesting place to visit, not just within Gaza, but within the region. It's performing a job as a specialized neighborhood for this overall region of this broader mega city that stretches all the way down from Haifa. Next. And then next slide, please. Fine. Okay, so next slide. So as part of this overall vision, Sebastian, the economics team, as well as the planners, worked very, very hard to identify all sorts of projects, foundation projects. These are kinds of projects that you had to do right away that create the basis for ongoing development. Integrated projects, these are things like Gateway, the core, the Wadi, the beach, that you can kind of bring forward as almost major urban initiatives that involve lots of overlapping bits of infrastructure and human development. And then local projects, these are things that you could probably do right now before you even had an overall funding in place for major infrastructure pieces. These are almost standalone projects that local areas could do on their own right now with their own sets of donors. Next. So we're not going to, obviously you can't see anything here, but we looked at over about 60 to 70 catalytic projects. But what's important is that we evaluated these according to 6 principles. How urgent are they to fulfill the reconstruction needs that we need to do right now that Omar talked about? Which of these projects are early wins that are pretty easy to bring about without a great deal of funding, without huge amounts of political cooperation? Which of these projects were the lowest cost to deliver? Which of these projects created risk incentives that would encourage the private sector to take them on without too much governmental investment as well? Which of these projects would create the strongest aspirational postcard views for Gaza, for example, which would encourage and embolden investors and visitors to come and spend some time in the area? And perhaps most importantly, which of these projects created a direct benefit, not just for people in Gaza and for Palestine, but also for people in the region and Israel in particular? So if you have a project that is symbiotically benefiting the broader population, that creates risk incentives for the private sector, that fulfill urgent requirements, that are relatively easy to bring forward, you start to have a sense of projects that really should be prioritized in the short term. Next slide. And so these are some of the projects that we thought sort of fulfilled that balanced scorecard. You can see a lot of them in the urgent column are really around power and water and waste. These are the issues that Omar rightly is focusing on. But look at all the projects on the right side that also create benefits for Israel, that create benefits for the region. So even if you don't care about Gaza, if you don't care about the population, you're in Israel and you only care for yourself, these may be projects that you would want prioritized so that you benefit, not just the Palestinians. And this is just a kind of a philosophical view about how projects could then be coordinated with a vision. Next. And we just think this is the future of Gaza. It's an extraordinary place. It's not a place just of hardship. It's a place of future. It's a place of a young population that is striving to connect globally, that is not focused just on the short term. It's a place that's attractive for a broader population of investors. It's a place that's good for Palestinians. It's a place that benefits Israel. So this is our view for Connected Gaza. Next slide.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I just want to remind folks who are watching that if you have questions that you'd like to submit, please email them to info, I-N-F-O, @jstreet.org. And I'll be asking questions for the next 15, 20 minutes or so, and I'll try to integrate as many of your questions as possible. Omar, I just want to go back to you to ask, a lot of what is being laid out by this team has actually caught the attention of the American envoy, has caught the attention of the Israeli military. There seems to be interest in trying to develop some of these projects, yet at the very same time, it seems that the PA is chosen this moment to really try to achieve some gains vis-a-vis Hamas and is moving things in the other direction. Can you give us some insight as to why at this moment of all times it seems that the PA, Hamas, the level of feud seems to have been rising and is setting back the potential for some of these movements in the right direction?
Thank you very much for the presentation. And for Chris, I was honored to be part of this project for some workshop and seminars. What we say all the time, that Gaza is a handmade crisis. Gaza is a typical example of something what was supposed to be positive turned to be a catastrophe. Gaza has all the reason to be prosper, to be rich, to be part of regional stability and regional prosperity. It has all elements: human right, human social, human education, strategic location, water, gas. It has all significant elements that make Gaza one of the prosperous area in the region. Unfortunately, the PA policies in the past 10 years failed totally in bringing Gaza back or to restoring unity of the Palestinian territory. I disagree totally with this punishment-based approach. They thought that squeezing Gaza will push people to go against Hamas. Example, they don't pursue the hope-oriented approach, which I said all the time to our president or to our political leaders. We need to promote what can Gaza be if things become better. It can be part of regional stability. It be useful for everybody. Prosper Gaza is not good. It's not good only for Gaza. It's good for Israel, for the stability of the whole region, include Gaza. The Israeli mentality need to be different. They need to look at us as a partner. They need to look at the potential of Gaza. Some 20 years ago, Gaza was totally different. The GDP of Gaza per capita was one of the highest of the Middle East. 45% in the 90s of those who used to work in the tourism sector in Israel were Palestinian from Gaza. Gaza workers were making $3 million a day. Gaza used to export so many items to Israel, to America, and to Europe. Until now, we have very good some economic sector, agriculture, furniture, garment, and many other things. International community need to understand the Palestinian that
We do seem to have lost you, Omar. I don't know if you can hear us, but I will.
And for the Palestinian territory. Unfortunately, both of the sides, they don't look at the positive approach. They think that making Gaza difficult will bring Gaza back. This is not going to work. It didn't work in the past 10 years. It's not going to work anywhere. What we said, I'm not defending anybody here. Hamas is part of Gaza. It's not going to disappear. We have to find a way to include them rather than to exclude them. It's like what applies in America, in France. You don't need to get rid of the people. You need to bring them in. And you need to create a system or environment where everybody be part of being part of a productive process, not punishing the process. As Chris said, and there is a report issued by UNRWA this week about 10 years of the Gaza blockade. Gaza will be 5 million people in 2050. We are increasing by 5,000 newborn every month are under 25 years old. There has been a very productive, prominent private sector in Gaza. Gaza has a huge potential, and Gaza can be easily turned into a good place. I think we need to promote this idea and to promote this project. There has been some other studies about the potential of Gaza by AECOM and by other institutions. We need to convince the political leadership and the international community need to adopt such an idea. Gaza is in need for a quick intervention. Otherwise, we are going to catastrophe. I am living in Gaza. I'm suffering like other people. It's become unbearable. You can imagine refugee camp in Jabalia, 150,000 people in 5 kilometers square. They don't have electricity for 20 hours a day for the past couple of years. Every child in Gaza who's 11 years old didn't witness in his life a 24 electricity. The Gaza youth have never been outside. They don't understand what the outside look like. So we need to intervene as quick as possible. There is a huge potential, even at the political level. Also, again, I don't want to promote anybody here, but Hamas presented its political document a couple of months ago. It wants to be part. This document needs to be taken seriously. I think they have shown high willingness to be normal, to be integrated. We need to think differently, and the Israeli and the Palestinian need to understand that. And we hope our president understand that his policy in the past 10 years towards Gaza was a big failure. It made Gaza much worse. It made Gaza more radical. There is a lot of radicalism in Gaza who left Gaza to Sinai, who are there now. 2 weeks ago, the attacks against the Egyptian army, which killed 33 Egyptian army, 6 of the attackers were from Gaza. We need to understand this fact, and we need to bring this fact all the time among us. And we are not far away from Israel. 5 kilometers. Israel is far away from us, 5 kilometers. Israel cannot live in peace if Gaza suffers as much as we have now.
So thank you very much, Omar. And I want to just go back now to the AECOM team and ask you a couple of questions, 1 or 2 of which have come up from questions people are submitting. And again, if people have questions, please email them to info@jstreet.org. First question is, to what extent are any of the steps that have been announced in the last week or 2, both related to water and electricity, in line with some of the initial steps, as you said, for early wins and quick steps that need to be taken? Second question is, to what extent were any Israeli private sector businesses involved in this? Because obviously there is a connection, particularly in the north, to what is happening north of the Gaza border. And then finally, you didn't go into much detail in terms of the West Bank Gaza linkage, but I assume that that's a very important early step that would need to be taken. So 3 separate questions, if you can address any of those.
Right. Well, let's start just with the Israeli. How are the Israelis evolved? How are the early steps aligned? And then the Gaza West Bank linkage. Sebastian, do you want to take on some of these questions? Well, see if you can be close to the microphone. If it's too rough, I'll take over.
Yeah, hello. I don't know if you can hear me. Now I'm quite close with the mic. Is that okay?
It's coming in and out, Sebastian.
Okay, so let me see. Is this any better?
Yes, that's much better.
Okay, cool. Very briefly, as part of the, one thing that I would like to stress is that this vision was not built out of our desire at AECOM of the Portland Trust, whom I used to work with. I was part of the project in that capacity. It was a truly collaborative effort where this vision is hopefully the reflection of the aspirations of the many people we involved. Those 300 plus stakeholders that Luke was mentioning in the beginning. Each trip, each visit we made, we workshopped many of these ideas. And as I said, this is reflecting that emerging consensus, which, as you can imagine, was not easy to construct and is not perfect by any means. In that overall picture, we did include consultations with Israeli stakeholders, which, as you can imagine, was incredibly complex. But primarily, we have worked out of extensive meetings and workshops in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, But yes, the voices of, can we say that we incorporated the voices of pretty much everyone in Israel? No, we didn't. Would that have been possible in the first place? Probably not. But primarily, this is driven out of the sphere of the Palestinian private sector who commissioned the work, and a wide array of independent experts, including, really renowned experts like Omar. But yes, there was some consultation with Israeli stakeholders, and this is a living animal, right? We did as much as we could in the time frame we had, including the people that were, happy to speak to us at that point. Many of them super in favor, who understand what Omar was saying, that is crucial for the development of Israel to have a thriving neighbor. And some others who were, initially not so keen on these ideas, but we heard everyone and playing our technical role. We played eminently a technical role, trying to translate those aspirations as neatly as possible in this very comprehensive, very bold plan as well.
On the issue of alignment of the early steps with a plan, one of the great bits of progress we can report is that we have now signed an MOU, we meaning Connected Gaza, which is now standing up as its own entity with local representatives in the West Bank and in Gaza. Connected Gaza has signed an MOU with UNDP. UNDP is using this as a framework to guide their own work and to guide reconstruction efforts. The Office of the Quartet, including the investment arm for the Quartet, is also using the Connected Gaza report as a framework to guide their own investments and discussions about work in the area. So we're very gratified that because we identified the catalytic projects and we identified where they're located spatially, it has a lot of utility for all sorts of people who are organized around international aid in the short term. So yes, we believe the early steps are increasingly aligned with the overall plan. In terms of the West Bank and the Gaza linkage, we know that right now we can read the headlines. Are there movements? Are there people who believe that they should be engaged or not engaged, connected or not connected? We believe in the long term that the most specialized, best connected communities always win. There are zero examples of cities, urban areas that get wealthier, that become more attractive by losing their connectivity. So we believe it is ultimately for everyone's selfish interest, ultimately to be better connected. And that goes first and foremost for the West Bank and Gaza.
And I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead, Sebastian.
I was just going to ask Chris, and just adding to what you said with the West Bank connection, building on this principle of more integration, more connection, thinking about one Palestinian state with the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem was one of the key principles that we got from our clients, the commissioners of this work, that, well, let's build around that. And it made a lot of technical sense as well. So the whole vision is built around that principle. We see it on the economics, where we are treating everyone as Palestinian people, in this case, no matter where they live. And the recommendations on what could be the strategic sectors for growth and employment have a lot to do with looking at the economic structure of the West Bank and of the broader region as one thing. So the connection is very much there, and the integration is very much there in each and every one of the recommendations we make. So like specialized in this sector, specialized in the other sector, you see it in the recommendations we make towards stressing more and more functions that have to do with trade and logistics. For example, Gaza is effectively Palestine's global gateway. It's its connection to the sea. It's the city that makes of Palestine not only a Middle Eastern country, but also a Mediterranean country. So you will see that connection coming through in every aspect of the plan, from the economics to the infrastructure to anything you look into. It's one of the core guiding principles.
So we have a couple of minutes left. We'll try to end this call at 1 o'clock Eastern. And the two questions that are on the table that have come in, one is related to the financing. How will all of this be financed? And are there private sector efforts to build up a fund or any other form of conditional financing that would be there when the moment is right? So I'll ask that of the AECOM team. And then another question that came in is, how do the current Israeli government and the current government in Gaza, the Hamas government in Gaza, feel about these plans? Have these plans been presented to those two governments, and are they supportive and willing to help? And so, Omar, I'll ask you if you know whether or not the authorities in Gaza have seen any of these plans and whether they have interest in thinking in this kind of way. So we'll start with the AECOM team, and then I'll end with you, Omar.
So very quickly, in terms of funding, in particular private sector funding, remember who the original funders were for our own report in the first case. There was Paltel, the telecommunications company, CCC, a major Palestinian-led construction company. So obviously these are groups that are deeply involved in infrastructure, and they potentially are willing to take some risk and do something in the area. Palestine Investment Fund, the PIF, is very interested in building up training, youth training, so that they can go into some of the emerging sectors that we identified, in particular some of the advanced industries. They're interested in doing some investment along those lines. USAID, for example, is interested in water projects in Gaza. So they now are pursuing some of that now, desal plants. And then, of course, through the UNDP, you have all the other donor organizations that link to them, whether it's the Norwegians or anybody else. UNDP is often the hub for this kind of thing, and the Office of the Shuruk, which is part of the Office of the Quartet, is also guiding a lot of the private sector and public sector investment into that area.
And Omar, to what extent do you think that the Hamas authorities have been exposed to this kind of vision, and is there an interest in thinking about the future in this way from the authorities currently running the Gaza Strip?
To the best of my knowledge, I was not part of the following up. I was just some of workshop, but I get to know that AECOM or the project has been promoted by CCC, and they met with some officials in Gaza, and I think there were some welcoming, although there were some critique and some suspicious about the project, because all this kind of suspicious attitude and conspiracy theory, what they do it and why and how. And maybe that's why I suggested to Chris and Sebastian, this kind of project need to be localized, need to be Palestinian driven, although they are supported by the private sector, but they need to be owned by the society, by the private sector, by the civil society, who can promote this, because we are in a very politicized society, and people look at suspiciously about everything. And maybe one of the points that this project is lacking is the community ownership, although the idea are really great and we need to think about it. One of the problem, Jeremy, is that Gaza is ruled by Hamas by de facto, but by the coalition government since 2014. The coalition government didn't work fully in Gaza. The international community pursued the no contact policy of Hamas is not going to disappear. So we are in the middle of a problem. We need to find out of the box solution through international regional partner, and through pursuing or convincing or promoting the positive side. I think even Hamas and Israel will support such a project if this project are promoted in the right way. I'm not very aware. I think Palestinian Authority in Ramallah also, they were not 100% on the project, because they were scared that this project will not be part of their strategy. That we need to localize these ideas, and it doesn't need to be promoted or built in one time. I add finally to what Chris said. We have so many Palestinian rich people outside. They have a lot of billionaires. The Gulf countries are more willing to support. This project need to promote it as a profit-oriented project, not as humanitarian. We don't need people to come to help us. We need people to come to invest in Gaza. They will make a lot of money. Gaza is in need for 100,000 housing units. Can you imagine? We talk about $2 to $3 billion. It's a real market. It's already there. The problem is how we can exit from the blockade and of the no-contact policy. There are some ideas. We as civil society, we are trying to work. I'm going to Germany in 1 month to talk about this idea as well. So we need to be real partnership. There is a huge opportunity.
Well, I want to say thank you very, very much to you, Omar, and then to the whole AECOM team, to Chris and to Luke and to Sebastian. We will certainly be making all of this information available on our website and through social media, and we plan to make real use of this presentation. Hopefully it does live up to the standards of our theme for our work this year, which is looking for solutions rather than focusing all the time on the problems, looking for a way to move forward to a better future rather than living in an argument about the problems that we've caused in the past. So thank you for giving us a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of hope, a glimpse at some of the possible solutions, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in future Solutions at 70 video calls that'll be coming about once a month over the course of the next year. So thank you to everybody who's listened. Thank you to our participants, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you, J Street. Thank you, Jeremy.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a nice evening.